Welcome to episode 54, Azorius Control. I just recently hit YouTube Partner, which has been very exciting, so you have the opportunity to click the join button if you would like. It comes with some interesting perks for different tiers, and you could be one of my first YouTube members. And the best way to help support me is by doing what you're already doing, and remembering to click like, subscribe, and leaving a comment. So with that, let's get started. The theme on Arena for Azorius was supposed to be a tap tempo deck, and I think one of the biggest problems with it is that if you're up against Boros or Rakdos aggro, they're already attacking you, and all of their creatures are already tapped. So I've had the most success by choosing to go down a control pathway. And the strategy that I suggest is based heavily on the Princess Takes Flight and Johann's Stopgap as a synergy specific to Azorius. And then you're kind of looking for off-color removal and counter spells. So it's not uncommon to have an incredibly low creature count. My draft skeleton has 5 creatures, 7 if you count Hopeful Vigil. And the other thing, too, to keep in mind is that there are some bargain synergies anytime that you're in blue and you've got hatching plans. If you're going to go do the bargain strategy, which works nicely to get rid of your Princess Takes Flight as well, I like to aim for a minimum of 5. So my draft skeleton here includes 6. And one thing to note is that there is no way to loop your library. So you need some sort of win condition, like Imidane's Recruiter, or Archive Dragon, or Balluna's Gatekeeper. Something that can actually close out the game. Because without that, you can just end up spinning your wheels, eliminating all of your opponent's threats, and then just losing to mill. So but because you are planning on answering your opponent's threats one for one, I think that you should have at least a minimum of 8 pieces of removal. And I've talked about this a little bit here and there. I count counter spells towards the 8, but I don't usually count them towards the 5, right? So you kind of want like 5 pieces of removal that are outside of the counter spells in case they completely fall apart, and then you can kind of have the counter spells on top. My draft skeleton, I will admit, is a little bit shy on that number. It only has 4 pieces of removal outside of the counter spells. But because Princess Takes Flight, one of the things that I'm trying to do specifically in this archetype is loop Princess Takes Flight and play it multiple times. So Princess Takes Flight generally ends up being more than 1 piece of removal. So with that, let's get started diving into each card individually. Hopeful Vigil is a mythic level uncommon. And I say that not because of the overall win rate, but because I need this card for Azorius to function. The problem is that they are usually gone by pick 5, because they're a top common and great in every white deck. But they have amazing synergies with Bounce, as well as Bargain. So, keep your eyes out for this one. Try to pick them up around, before pick 5 if you can. And one thing to note too is that Azorius was the worst archetype in Wilds of Eldraine, because of how poorly the tap strategy actually turned out to be. So it's not something that I think you should ever force, but like with most things, I like to build a strategy in case I end up there, right? And if you're going to do it, it's key to pick up Hopeful Vigil. We've got Torch the Tower, which I still think is best in Izzet or in Simic, which are the primary other bargain blue strategies. But keep your eyes out for off-color removal that bargains, since it fits very well into the bargain control strategy in Azorius as well. And one of the ways that you get this to work is that my other top common is Prophetic Prism. And usually this is something that I add to my deck kind of late in pack 3 when I need some more sources for an off-color splash. But I think that this one is critical to my strategy in Azorius. And if you've heard any of the episodes on Bargain Blue by Sam Black, There's a reason why Sam Black's top one of if not the highest top drafted common is Prophetic Prism. This card allows you to do a lot in the control space, and a fair number of cards are leaning into the tempo strategy in blue-white. And then since that turned out to be a complete flop, you need to have a flexible mana base to splash, and this helps you do that. And at the same time, it draws when it enters the battlefield, which is very important if your plan is to answer everything that your opponent plays 1 for 1. It is available late, around pick 7 or 8, but it is so critical to the Azorius strategy. I often don't risk them going late if I know that this is the archetype that I'm going to be in. And Archon's Glory, I didn't include it in my draft skeleton because of leaning so heavily into control and having such a low creature count. That being said, there are some rares that make me want to have Archon's Glory that we'll talk about later in the episode when I cover the rares. And the more that you are leaning towards creatures and a little bit less control, then this works really well with the bargain strategy and being able to push evasive damage while also gaining you life. So the closer that you're kind of like pushing towards a tempo strategy, which I don't recommend, but if you end up there, it can work. And Archon's Glory is definitely one of those cards that helps it work. And you can take advantage of the fact that this card wheels. And then Into the Fate Court, similar to Izzet Control or Dimir Control, Into the Fate Court is how you always have more removal than the number of your opponent's threats. Somebody asked in Sam Black's episode, how do you answer your opponent's top decks? And his answer was Into the Fate Court. If you're sitting there and your opponent is top decking late in the game and you've already got 3 pieces of removal in your hand because your hand size is just bigger than your opponent's, you're going to have a pretty good time handling your opponent, right? And the other thing, too, that I like to take advantage of, or one of the reasons why I actually end up in blue a fair amount, is because Into the Fate Court wheels. So being able to take these late has been partially why I end up in blue so often in Wilds of Eldraine. And then we've got Ice Out, which I think the best archetype is Azorius, but specifically Azorius Control, right? Like I don't think you really want it in the Azorius Tempo deck. It does work really nicely if with your bargain synergies, getting rid of your Princess Takes Flight and your Hatching Plans, which we'll cover shortly in the Uncommons. And it also is a card that you can take advantage of that it wheels. Candy Grapple, similar to Torch the Tower, is another just off-color removal that bargains, and so it's really good. And the one downside with Torch the Tower and Candy Grapple is that you'll have to take it early. And but it's a card that you should already be taking early because it's one of the best common removals in the set, right? And so like if you end up pivoting from a different space, right? Like a lot of times you'll be like blue-red or blue-black, and it's just not quite coming together. So you're seeing a lot of white flowing. So you start to be like, okay, well maybe I'm going to pivot from those control spaces into the blue-white control space. And so it's not uncommon for me to have already picked up Candy Grapple and Torch the Tower. But if you've already gone into Azorius, it's like hack 3, definitely still keep your eyes out to take these early. And then Stockpiling Celebrant is, I still think it is best in Black-White Orsov, just because I love it so much to bounce a Hopeless Nightmare and be able to make your opponent discard again and lose 2 life. And it combines with the Princess Takes Flight at Uncommon and Hopeful Vigil at Common. So if you don't have the interesting enchantments to loop with this, then this goes way down in value, right? But one of the things that's nice about it is that it usually is available pretty late, not quite on the wheel, but pretty late, around 6 or 7. And one of the things that I tend to avoid white unless I'm seeing specific cards, right? Like, and Stockpiling Celebrant is one of them, right? And people figured out that you could do some interesting stuff with this kind of early on in the set. So there was a long period of time where I just didn't see any Stockpiling Celebrants. And so if you're watching this and it's like a flashback to the set, maybe you can get on the stockpiling thing before everybody remembers exactly what was going on with that. Because this is one of those cards that enables you to extend your amount of removal in your deck combining it specifically with the Princess Takes Flight, which, you know, isn't really specific to Azorius. It's just, it works well in this archetype. And then we've got Kellen's Light Blades, which, similar to Torch the Tower, it's really good for that bargain synergy removal. I do think that it actually performs a little bit better in Izzet, and partially because like Izzet doesn't really have a problem playing this card off of treasure production. Red is really good at creating treasure tokens. And similarly, like I think it's actually slightly better in Simic as well, just because I think that both Izzet and Simic are doing the bargain control strategy or bargain synergies a little bit better, and you can cast it off of like Fawn. But if you're in blue-white, you know, you definitely can take advantage of the fact that this also, similar to Stockpiling Celebrant, goes late and is often available around 6 or 7. And then we've got Johann's Stopgap, which I think this is the reason that I wind up in Azorius when I do. And it's because, you know, I pick up a Princess Takes Flight early in pack 1, and then I'm looking to maximize its synergies. And similarly, if I pick up a Hatching Plans early or plan to try to pick one up later, it works really well with either of those two cards. And specifically because with Princess Takes Flight, you can bargain it if you want to end it, but you don't have to, right? Like you can just play this out for 4, and because it bounces a non-land permanent, you can bounce the Princess Takes Flight and put it back into your hand. And it's card neutral, so that works really well with the whole control theme and just in general. And it is available on the wheel. You can take this one incredibly late. Spell Stutter, similar to Izzet and Dimir Control, I like to play Spell Stutter anytime that I'm aiming for a hard control strategy. It works a little bit less well in tempo-based strategies, just because being able to only counter unless your opponent plays 2. If you're playing this later, like turn 4 or turn 5, it can kind of backfire if they're still if they're trying to 2-spell, like double spell. And so in tempo, it can be kind of awkward because that's usually when I start looking to do more of my interaction. Now, in hard control, you're just like, anytime I have the opportunity to trade 1 for 1, I'm going to. And I'm trying to answer all of your threats. So Spell Stutter works pretty well if that's kind of what you're doing. If that makes sense. And you can also take advantage of the fact that many people don't like the control strategy, and Spell Stutter is often available on the wheel. Sleight of Hand I've found to be useful in finding your removal, and in blue-red it works well to boost the amount of spells in your deck that one of the red cards deals X plus 2 damage, where X is the number of spells, so there's a little bit of synergies more in Izzet. But one of the things that I end up playing Sleight of Hand probably the most in Azorius, because it is a way to thin your deck and find your removal. And it's not uncommon for me to be in a little bit of a panic state if I end up in Azorius. So I can be a little bit short on playables. And but the upside is that this card is often available and you can take it on the wheel. Oh, and one thing that I would like to throw in there too is because it is kind of known in the community that blue-white is not a very good space, I have enjoyed this as an option in pod in competitive tournaments where people have studied the set. I think generally you can find something better, but when you're in pod, the quality goes down and it's a lot harder. So you can kind of end up in a blue-white space because it's underdrafted, and is one of the perks to the archetype. I've also really liked Candy Trail, and part of it is because like the card itself can be card neutral. So if you're just treating it as like a pay 3, gain 3 life, and draw a card and scry 2, that's pretty good in decks that have the time to kind of make it happen. And then additionally, Izzet has more bargain fodder because of the treasure producers, and Azorius does not, right? So Azorius, sometimes you end up in that awkward moment where you don't have anything to bargain, right? And so Candy Trail can be helpful to extend your bargain fodder, and is another card that you can take advantage of on the wheel. Imidane's Recruiter is a broken card, and anytime that you are in white or red, I recommend playing Imidane's Recruiter, and it is one of the 3 mythic uncommons in Azorius. So being able to just this is a win condition, right? If you have an empty board, you've controlled your opponent into oblivion. They have nothing. They're in the top deck stage, and you flip over three 2s with haste, hit them for 9, and then you have 3 threats that your opponent needs to top deck and answer for. It's a great way to win the game. So and you can play the red side off. You're gonna usually play this as like an 8-drop, right? Like it's not something that you never want to play this out as just a 3/2 haste for 3 in this archetype. But you can play the red off of Prophetic Prism, and yeah, definitely one of those things that you should be looking for. The other one that I really liked is Woodland Acolyte, and this one's my second Mythic level uncommon in Azorius specifically, and I think Azorius is its best archetype. You can splash the Wilds Adventure side off of Prophetic Prism to get back Princess Takes Flight. And that's kind of the the end goal that I have for this archetype, is just how many times can I actually play the Princess Takes Flight, right? And the upside too is that even if you don't do the adventure side to get back Princess Takes Flight, it is still card neutral, and that's important for a control deck that can't afford to lose out on the card advantage game. And then my third Mythic level uncommon in Azorius is Threadbind Click. And it is good in every white archetype because the adventure side is just so awesome. But in Azorius, it is one step better because you don't have to splash blue to play the 4-cost 3/3 flyer. And, a flyer in a pinch can end up being a win condition in and of itself. And then we've got Charade of Numbing Depths, which is, I think, single-handedly the reason why people got tempted into the tap theme in the first place. And I decided not to include it in my draft skeleton, but it is still a good inclusion in Azorius decks. And I still think it's great in Control, too, because it is card neutral and slows your opponent down. I don't think that you should lean, even if you have this, I don't think you should lean further into the tap synergies, just because, like I mentioned, it can be difficult to find a target to tap in this set if you're up against a very aggressive archetype. But it's good enough just in and of itself, and so it's definitely worth including. The only reason why I didn't include it in my draft skeleton is because I limit myself to 5 uncommons. And then similarly, Neva Stalked by Nightmares. This is the black-white Orzhov signpost uncommon, which was something that was somewhat underwhelming in Orzhov. But I found it to work wonders in Azorius. The name of the game is how many times can we play the one copy of the Princess Takes Flight, and this helps me do that, right? And also, since you've answered everything your opponent has played 1-for-1 in an ideal scenario, the Menace works quite well as to get through your opponent's last remaining defender. And then here's the bread and butter, right? Princess Takes Flight, I probably should have mentioned earlier in the draft guide, but technically the strategy can work without it. It does help extend the number of removal in your deck that you're ultimately running, and being able to play it multiple times can just absolutely win you a game. But technically speaking, you can get the archetype to work without Princess Takes Flight. So, and similarly, Hatching Plans is somewhat redundant if you are already running 2 copies of Into the Fate Court. But because card draw is so critical to making Control work, it made it into my draft skeleton as well. And I do think it is still slightly better in Izzet. I think that Izzet in general is doing it slightly better than blue-white, just because of the treasure token leans so nicely into the bargain synergy in and of itself. And then Shrouded Shepherd, still best in Orzhov, where you don't have to splash for the black. And you can take advantage of the putting a +2/+2 on a flyer. And similar to Archon's Glory working better the more creatures that you have in your deck, you can play the adventure side off of Prism. But if this is your only creature, right? Like if you've got 7 creatures in your deck and this is the only one that you're playing, it's kind of underwhelming. right? So the more that you're leaning, similar to Archon's Glory, right? The more that you're leaning in towards the tempo strategy, then the more tempted I am to play the Shrouded Shepherd. Or if I have an early fairy like Picklock Prankster, something that like maybe I can get that take advantage of getting that evasive damage through. But similar to Izzet and Dimir Control, if the majority of your deck are just spells, then I've really loved Picklock Prankster, since the adventure side, as long as it doesn't whiff, this is going to be card neutral. And I do think it's still best in Dimir because of fairy synergies, but I've liked it in Azorius. And another great option for fixing is Edgewall In. It also works incredibly well to get back Threadbind Click to extend the amount of removal that you have available in your deck. And now for the rares. The top performing rare in Azorius is Horned Lock Whale. Being able to disrupt your opponent's tempo and then come in later as a 6/6 Ward 2 creature makes it one of the top performing rares, and it fits perfectly into a control strategy. We've got Spellbook Vendor, which Azorius is its worst archetype because no creatures, right? Like, the more creatures that you have, the more that you're leaning into the tempo strategy, the better that Spellbook Vendor will do. But even then, I don't mind Spellbook Vendor. Even if you're just playing it out as a 2/2 that becomes a 3/3, or as a 3/3 on turn 3 that then scries with Vigilance, it's a defensive card, and the scry helps you find more removal, and so it works well enough in and of itself. But usually you want to have more creatures. And then Expel the Interlopers, I've really enjoyed in Azorius, and I think Azorius is its best archetype. And it is the chosen rare for my draft skeleton. Because, one of the things is, like, why would I end up in blue-white other than, like, why would I end up in blue-white instead of blue-red, right? Or blue-black? And part of that is opening up something like Expel the Interlopers, where I'm like, okay, well, it's a Wrath, I want to play Control, and so let's make Azorius work. And similarly, we've got the Werefox Bodyguard. I find this card to be best in Azorius, so if I open up this one and pack one, pick one, I might actually choose to try to get into Azorius from the beginning. And the reason why I like it so much in Azorius over other white archetypes is because of the flash, right? It's one of the few flash creatures that you can take advantage of holding up counter spells, and then if they don't play anything, you can flash in the Werefox Bodyguard, and the fact that it is also removal in and of itself, or in a pinch can be used to save your one busted win condition, right? Like if you're running an Archive Dragon and they finally have a removal for it, you can use this as a 5-cost save my busted creature. And then Sleep Cursed Fairy, still best in Dimir, but I'd argue that Sleep Cursed Fairy's second best archetype is Azorius. It's a very similar plan. Azorius is a similar plan to Izzet, where you hold up counter spells. If they don't play a counter spell, then you just choose to untap Sleep Cursed Fairy and ramp it to actually being able to apply pressure. But part of the reason why I think that it's slightly better in Azorius than it is in Izzet is Archon's Glory. And I mentioned back when I was talking about that card that Archon's Glory can be used if I have some specific rares, right? Like, I'll actually look to pick it up, even in a control archetype. And the reason is because of the X3 hate of both Torch the Tower and Candy Grapple. So if they bargain Candy Grapple, you're kind of out of luck, right? But if they're just playing it as a -3/-3, which, and paying for the ward, being able to instantly give this thing +2/+2 for 1 white is pretty easy to hold up and can save your Sleep Cursed Fairy. And similarly, I've really liked Talion's Messenger and the Archon's Glory for the same reasons. And I do think it is still slightly better in Dimir because of fairy synergies. But this thing can be a win condition in and of itself, and you don't need additional fairies to make this thing awesome. And being able to loot into your control, get rid of your lands once you have enough mana. Make sure that you hit your lands with, because in Control you do not want to miss a land drop. There's a lot of it. Just works really well. It's a great card in general, right? And then the last rare is Twining Twins, and I've found this one to be slightly better in Izzet, since you don't need Archon's Glory to save it from the X3 hate, and it has Izzet has better tools in general to pull off the bargain control strategy. Either archetype is really looking for a 4/4 flying vigilance ward 1, so hopefully I don't have to do much to convince you to play this card. And you don't have to splash for the instant side adventure where you exile something and blink it, and it comes back into play, which works nicely if you do have something like Acolyte, or even a Stockpiling Celebrants to trigger the bounce again for your Princess Takes Flight, right? So the adventure side works quite well in Azorius. And then last is the Mythic, and we've got one Mythic, which is Virtue of Loyalty. And there's nothing spectacular about this in Orsov, right? Or in Azorius. It's great in every white archetype. And you don't need a huge board for this to be a lethal threat. Like, honestly, you need one thing that continuously gets a +1/+1 counter, and the pseudo vigilance too of being able to attack and then untap after the attack phase has just been amazing. So thanks for watching to the end of the video and listening to my ramblings. I hope it helps you get those trophies and draft infinitely. I post multiple videos a week, so remember to hit like and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content. And I've covered every archetype in Wilds of Eldraine, so I thought I'd end with some end-of-set remarks, right? I really enjoyed the set, and I definitely plan to revisit it again, either in my community drafts that I host every Tuesday, or if it comes back as a flashback option on Arena. It was amazing to see that the game designers were able to give both aggro and control options, made them both viable. And outside of Imidane's Recruiter, I didn't have any really big problems with the set. I do wish that Imidane's Recruiter was a little bit less powerful than it actually is, right? But I do feel like the set, too, it felt like it had some really good archetypes to explore. Now, there were a couple of whiffs, right? I mean, like, the blue-white tap deck was a total flop. The white-black, like, enchantments going to the graveyard thing was a total flop. But you could still make those two-color archetypes work, right? And I guess, to some extent, the Simic 5-drop plan didn't really work either. And it took a little while for people to come up on blue. I think that Hatching Plans like single-handedly saved a color that looked questionable at best at the beginning of the set. And but the set evolved nicely over time. People figured out how to get different strategies to work. It's nice to see how So I like to see a set evolve over time. And I do think that happened in Wilds of Eldraine. It wasn't just like, this is the best strategy, force this in, it didn't feel like some other sets where it's like, okay, I'm always playing one color and that color alone. So I really liked that. And, they did a really good job of rewarding players for going out of just playing two colors, right? They rewarded splashing pretty heavily. And I thought the adventure side made that, like, I ended up splashing more often than not, right? And I usually am kind of hesitant to splash. So it was cool that they encouraged that, but at the same time, they didn't entirely eliminate the two-color theme that was going on. And so let me know what you thought about the set, what you liked the most in the comments below. And I'll be taking a short break on this No Rares Required series while I get in some practice reps for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. But I will be back with No Rares Required on November 21st. So thank you all for the support, and good luck getting those trophies.